give Reverend Newbell about another 30, 45 seconds.
You think he can climb the stairs that fast?
Yeah, I made the mistake of getting on the one that stops on everything.
On the local,
Yeah.
not the express.
Anybody want water?
You can carry out 4. You want one?
Is he in the building? Thank you.
Aaron's good for
Okay, thank you. Should we begin? All right, let's call to order today's meeting. If I could get everyone to stand for a time of reflection, followed by the pledge to the flag. Oh, he's here. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Can we go around the dais and do introductions for those in the audience today?
Sure. Andy Allen, new board member.
Alan Howard, old board member.
Emil Lee Johnson, Secretary.
April Green, I'm sorry,
Lynn Rhodey, Office of General Counsel.
April Green, Chairman.
Aaron Zahn, CEO.
Welcome.
Thank you very much. Happy to be here.
I would give you a warning, but I think you should be burned by the fire like the rest of us. If we could get the, can I get a motion to adopt the consent agenda?
Second.
Any discussion? Approved. Safety briefing?
Do you need a motion to adopt the actual agenda as well?
Do we need a motion to adopt the today's agenda?
I think you said consent agenda, but meant the regular.
I meant the regular agenda. Thank you for that.
Yep.
So we'll do that over. Can I get a motion to accept today's agenda?
So moved.
Still second.
No changes or comments?
No.
All right, approved. Thank you, I appreciate that. Safety briefing, Mr. Zahn?
Yes, safety is a core value of JEA. And in the event of an emergency, may I have somebody in the audience that'll call 911? Ryan Wanamaker. Anybody that is trained in CPR? Melissa Dykes. Please identify the person to your right. That will be your safety buddy. If there's no one to your right, look behind you. And in the event of emergency, we'll make our way to the left of the elevators, orderly fashion, using the handrail, down the stairs on the left, and out to across Main and Church, and we'll reconvene there. We are all clear.
Thank you. And Sunshine Law Public Record Statement by Ms. Rhodey.
This meeting is subject to Florida's government and the Sunshine Law, Section 286.011, Florida statutes, and shall be open to the public at all times.
Thank you. Any comments from the public? I haven't received any cards. Do we have any? All right, let's move on. Is Councilmember Schellenberg here today?
He sends his regards and wishes us all well.
Nice and sweet. All right, so next on the agenda, we're going to review the St. Johns River Water Management District with Mr. Vineyard.
Good morning, Madam Chair. Herschel Vineyard here to introduce Dr. Ann Shortell. Dr. Shortell is a leading water scientist in the state of Florida. She's a leading water policy person in the state of Florida. Her background is she was the first C-suite level water policy director in the history of the state. So we're real pleased to have her here. She's run the Swanee River Water Management District. She's run the St. Johns River Water Management District. She's been a strong partner of JEA. She's going to tell us a little bit about what's going on with our water supply, and we're going to encourage her to be even a stronger partner with JEA. So, Dr. Shortell.
Welcome.
Madam Chair, members of the board, thank you so much for inviting us to be here today to share a little bit of our partnership with you all and celebrate some of our cost share opportunities. St. Johns River Water Management District is all a part of 18 counties, and one of the very strong directives from our governing board over the last 4 years has been to put projects in the ground, get collaboration with our utility partners, with agriculture and others, and put the dollars to work for the benefit of all Floridians for our water supply and our water quality throughout our 18 counties. Specifically, what you see on this slide is the last 8 years of cost share collaboration that JEA has specifically done with the district. In collaboration, $30 million worth of construction projects, either underway or in the ground already, with a little over $9 million of support from the district. Most of this, like the vast majority of these projects, are all reclaimed water reuse projects. And that's highly treated wastewater, instead of being put to tide, being put to use for irrigation and other purposes. In case you were wondering how much water JEA is putting out for all of your citizens, since 1995 to date, the last year that we have the data specifically graphed here is last year, 111 million gallons per day of water last year. But notice that this has come down a fair bit since 2006. The population in this area, your service area, since 1995 has actually increased 31%. You're now serving nearly 750,000 residents in this area. It's a big responsibility. It's an awesome job that you are doing. But notice that this is potable water. This is water out of the ground, okay? So this is the least expensive, most available water overall. But notice how it's come down since the early 2000s. That's because you are investing in water reuse to bring down the pressure on the aquifer and the potable demand by using alternative sources like reuse. The reason we do this is because it's so complicated. It takes so much planning together with all of our partners to make sure that we ensure our water supply for all of our citizens and protect the environment. And in Northeast Florida, we have actually, under the leadership of Secretary Vineyard at the time, a partnership with the state and both water management districts in that planning area that you can see there, all the way to the Swanee River to the west, and obviously including this area, protecting our springs, protecting our aquifer, protecting our rivers, protecting our lakes. We're all partners in this together. We're all going to be successful together. So, alternative water supplies are not that potable groundwater, but something different. And for JEA, as for many of the utilities, one of the primary resources that you have is already in your pipelines, right? It's the wastewater, which is actually drought-proof. Even during droughts, nobody stops flushing their toilets, nobody stops taking showers, but at least I hope not. So there's a lot of emphasis on getting that water really clean and then putting it to good use. Those big tall bars that you see there, kind of an orangish color, that is your challenge, because that is your water that is treated and put in the river and goes out to tide. But the smaller bars down at the bottom, the little purple ones, you've heard of purple pipes, that's the reuse water that you're putting to work beneficially. And fortunately, it's been growing over time. You're using about 20% of your available now. This is a big deal because it's your next big alternative water supply that you can put to work. I mean, that's a lot of water in the orange bar above the purple bar. Water Reuse Florida has done an awesome job. Statewide, we are the #1 state in water reuse. It's important to all Floridians, even though it seems like we have water all around us. When we're talking about our water supply, we've got to make the most of the fresh water that we have and clean it and preserve it because it's much, much more costly to go to the ocean. And you can see that there are a lot of innovative projects throughout Florida, 13 so far, and the Potable Reuse Commission has been working on framework for the state for permitting future projects. Notice that big red circle right up in this area? That's because 2 years ago, JEA, in partnership with the district and under your leadership, did a pilot project. And we all celebrated it not long ago. It was a particular project to test how that water that's coming out of your wastewater treatment plants, which is already clean, can be made even more pure and used for beneficial purposes. So you're on the cusp of being able to go to a demonstration level project, and we're encouraging you to do that. But today, we're actually celebrating our latest governing board action to cost share with you on 2 more projects in the coming year, $1.5 million, which is our cap per entity for the year. So you've maxed out from us, but the checks are for 2 projects. One is a reuse project, so congratulations there, and the other one is for water conservation, and it doesn't get any better than that.
Wow.
So congratulations.
Thank you so much.
I think we might want a photo, could we? You know, we don't take that to the bank, but those are big checks.
Pretty exciting news. All right, as we move on down the agenda, now we can, if I'd like to get a motion to approve the consent agenda.
So moved.
Get a first from Mr. Howard and a second from Reverend Newbell. Any discussion? All right, approved. All right, Mr. Wanamaker, you're up with the proposed 2020 operating and capital budgets.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Grab the clicker here. So this is an action item for the board today. JEA is required to submit its budget to the City Council each year by July 1st. This is the product of my team's work that began back in January. As part of the annual budget process, we have presented this budget to the Finance and Audit Committee at both the March and the May meetings for feedback. So I'll walk through a summary of both the energy and water budgets, but at a high level, the FY 2020 budget is approximately $70 million lower than FY 2019. I'm happy to report there are no proposed rate changes in either system in the FY 2020 budget. And we plan to cash fund the investment of over $500 million of infrastructure in Northeast Florida with no new debt. So I apologize for the small type here, but you can follow along on your board package. So starting at the energy system, we have a total budget of $1.25 billion, which is $36 million lower than FY 2019. This is attributable to a 2.8% decrease in budgeted electric sales versus the FY 2019 budget. On the city transfer, we're projecting $195 million in total transfers to the city via the JEA bill. The O&M budget is up $47 million versus the FY19 budget. This includes funding for several strategic initiatives, bargaining unit increases, and benefits increases. On the capital side, we are continuing to invest in the system with a CapEx budget of $261 million on the electric side. This is against a depreciation of $193 million. And again, we're cash funding that $261 million with no new debt. Finally, at the bottom, at the left side, we have our key credit metrics for the electric system, which are projected to be strong across the board. Debt service coverage is expected to be 3.9 times with 270 days of liquidity, and we'll end the year with $236 million less debt, or about 10% total reduction in our total debt outstanding. So moving to water, the water budget is $494 million, which is $34 million lower than the FY18 budget. Again, this is attributable to a decrease in budgeted sales versus the FY 2019 budget. On the city transfer from the water side, we're projecting total transfers of $51 million via the JEA bill. The O&M is budgeted to be $23.8 million higher versus FY19. This, again, includes funding for strategic initiatives such as septic tank phase-out study, storm resiliency work, in addition to increased benefit costs, bargaining unit, and estimated general increases. And then on the capital front, similar to the electric system, we're budgeting $260 million for capital, which continues to reflect a strong commitment to maintain our position as a top water utility in the country, which you just heard from Dr. Shortell. Very good lead-in, by the way. Similar to the electric system, we're making these investments with no new debt. Our water debt metrics at the bottom of the page on the right side look fantastic. Coverage is at 4.3 times, debt to capitalization of 43%, and 280 days of liquidity, with a total reduction of $148 million in debt. The next slide shows a breakdown of the JEA bill and where the money goes. And this slide really shows the impact of the STAR plan that the board authorized earlier this year. You can see the impact on our debt service portion of the bill. That's the second bar there. That's on the electric side, that's dropping by $66 million versus the FY 2019 budget. And this is what is allowing us to continue to devote almost $250 million of cash to the capital program, despite lower sales and higher O&M costs. The story is similar on the water side. We were able to lower debt service by $42 million and continue to devote over $200 million of operating cash flow to the capital program, despite the overall lower budget. Finally, our total government transfers. This chart shows our total government transfers going back to 2007. It's projected to be at an all-time high of $299.5 million next year. You can see the history of these contributions. The total transfers are up 55% since 2007. So today, JEA staff recommends the board approve the proposed operating and capital budgets for fiscal year 2020 and authorize staff to prepare and transmit the recommended budgets to the Jacksonville City Council for final action by July 1st, and then transmit the 5-year capital improvement plan as required by the City of Jacksonville Planning Department. We are also asking the board to approve JEA's share of the SGRPP and plant share operating and capital budgets, which are included in the overall budget. All of these schedules can be found with this board item in your package as Schedules A through D. Finally, we're asking to authorize the managing director and CEO to adjust the budget approved by the board and submitted to council if necessary within the total approved budgeted amounts for each system. I'd be happy to take any questions at this time.
Any questions?
Just a quick clarification for you. This is in line with the status quo that we were, okay,
Correct.
thank you.
Mr. Wanamaker, through the chair, any accelerated debt repayments under STAR for this budget year? I couldn't pick them out in the line items.
So we do have some planned on the electric system. We do not have them planned on the water system. For the purposes of the budget, we have not included a separate line item for those items. Right now, those funds are allocated to capital. However, we'll adjust those as we move through the year next year.
So follow up, what is the anticipated accelerated debt repayment for this budget year on the energy side?
I don't have the number in front of me. I'd have to follow up with you.
Magnitude, range?
I believe it was about $100 million, yeah.
Thank you.
I have a quick question. Under the O&M expenses, you mentioned on the energy side that there would be an increase due to some strategic initiatives. On the water side, you gave us an example of the septic tank phase out. What are some of those initiatives on the energy side?
So one of the main initiatives is the strategic planning initiatives with McKinsey. So we have some funding in there for that, as well as ongoing EAM, Enterprise Asset Management initiatives that we're working on in terms of innovation lab and things of that nature.
There's also funds allocated for dealing with Vogel from a strategic perspective.
Legal funding.
Yeah.
Okay. Do you have any questions? So if there's no further discussion, I'd like to hear what was some of the feedback from the city council.
So this has not been presented to City Council yet.
Okay.
This will be, once the board approves this, we would then take that action to submit it to City Council July 1st. And the process from there is that the council auditor will evaluate it, ask questions, and do their work. And then the council will have budget hearings later this summer.
Okay.
At that point, we'll get those questions.
To the chair, as we discussed at the Finance and Audit Committee, it's a bit of an unique situation where the budget, due to the required timeline for city council approval, is required to be submitted by July 1st, and then ultimately gets reviewed and authorized and appropriated in September. You know, in a normal course, as a company our size would be going through strategic planning the way we are, you would defer budgeting until the end of a strategic planning process and put in place a gap, some sort of gap budget. That would be kind of a normal corporate approach, but that's not available to JEA. So in some respects, this budget has been set based on knowledge that we have today. And I would imagine that as we move through strategic planning, we might have to reconsider how to come back in September or October once an actual strategic plan was chosen to evaluate what changes might need to be made.
And that option is available. Even though we weren't able to put a gap budget into place at this time, we will be given the opportunity once the strategic plan is completed to make changes. We have
counseled with OGC about how that process would work. It is cumbersome, but available.
I think it's important that the council understands that, and I'm sure you have communicated that you know, we are feverishly working through the strategic plan and trying to get it completed, but we also want to make sure that we do it responsibly and methodically. Alrighty. So we need to take action here. So can I get a motion to approve the proposed operating and capital budgets for fiscal year 2020?
So moved. Second.
I'm going to kind of combine all these so we don't have to do three different ones. Is that okay with everyone? Sure.
So it's the staff recommendation to approve the budget, approve the share of SJRPP and share, and authorize budget adjustments, those three?
All three?
Is that his motion?
That's my motion.
That's my second.
Any discussion? So moved.
Let's take a vote.
Let's take a vote. Can I get all in favor, say aye?
Aye.
Any nays? I don't think we did either. Approved. I don't believe we did either. Can I do it at the end? Okay, good. All right. Thank you, Brian.
Thank you.
We'll get it down back here eventually, right? Next on the agenda is we'll review the flex pricing. Mrs. Stewart? Financial, monthly finance and operational dashboard. Melissa Dykes.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Boy, I have to
Just checking
retrain
to see if
myself.
you were-
Yeah.
Just checking to make sure everybody else is on their toes today.
Exactly. My reflex is still to say good afternoon. I have to remember what time it is. There are a couple of changes I wanted to highlight on the dashboard this month that have changed since last month. The first one I'll touch on is water distribution system pressure. If you look at the bottom of that very first section of the dashboard, you'll see that that's flagged as red, and we've come off quite a bit since the month prior. And the reason I wanted to highlight that is because the month of May was pretty challenging for us on the water side. We had the highest flow during peak hours during the month of May. In particular, during that very hot, dry week, was 265 million gallons a day. And that's compared to what's normal for us is 164. And so what that presents for the community is risk around being able to make sure that we have sufficient water pressure and capacity flow to be able to provide fire protection to the community. So we very actively managed water pressure and flow throughout the entire system to make sure that, above all, we preserve life safety for the community, even though that we knew that was going to mean sacrificing this metric for the year, and it probably is going to mean sacrificing it for the year. Good news is we look good going into this month. It started raining again, and so that has helped with some of the pressure on flows in particular in the water system. But I did just want to flag that and highlight it as to why that turned red. No real change in the E4 versus this is generation fleet reliability versus last month. This still continues to reflect the problems that we had at the beginning of the year with Northside 2. Good news on the O&M budget, or tempered good news, I should say. I still do not believe we're going to be able to make this metric for the year, but we have seen a tick down in the percentage versus prior months, and I do believe we're going to see another one going into next month. We've gotten some aggressive on some cost control measures that should allow us to be able to make some progress there. I just don't think we're going to hit 95% for the year. I have asked Daryl to join me up here today because I wanted him to be able to follow up on some discussion that's come up in prior reports around the dashboard around an issue that does affect our dashboard metric, and that's third-party damages to our water and wastewater infrastructure.
Great, thank you. Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
My purpose is to update the board on the impact that damages to our infrastructure by contractors is having, and then our efforts to reduce the incidences. I've got an example there for you on the screen. That was McCormick Road. As you know, one of our board metrics is unplanned water outages. In this fiscal year, 30% of our outages and 21% of our customers impacted by those outages has been caused by hits like you see there on the screen. In this example, this was McCormick Road a number of months ago. Verizon, or one of their contractors drilling for them, hit our 20-inch water main. And fortunately for them, they didn't hit one of the 3 electrical circuits that was also in the area, the largest of which was a 230 kV circuit. And I'm told that had they hit that, we may have had a fatality. We would certainly have had a power quality significant event, and it could have taken upwards of a week to make repairs on that circuit. So what you see there is about $75,000 worth of impact to JEA on our water infrastructure. Certainly non-value added work for our crews, and we have significant safety challenges working at night and deep to make that repair. After this hit, we worked with the city and the DOT to slow Verizon and their contractor down while they got focused on process improvements, and we have seen that to a degree. So how big is the problem? This fiscal year for electric, water, and wastewater services, our damages have resulted in about $1.2 million being billed. That represents over 300 incidences combined. Cost recovery from the city's process hasn't been that great, and we are bringing billing and recovery in-house from the city. We will more aggressively pursue damage recovery through Ryan's area. Of roughly 180 hits to water and wastewater, the vast majority are related to communications and cable companies. For instance, 32 hits by AT&T and 18 by Comcast lead the way. The vast majority of these damages are caused by directional drilling or other heavy equipment, as you can imagine, and it's the root cause there, the contractors not doing what they need to do to spot our utilities vertically as they're doing their work. You may have heard the advertisements for Call Before You Dig or Dial 811. It's a Florida statute-backed company, corporation that requires contractors to notify existing utilities prior to their work, and then we go out and put paint on the ground to spot those utilities, and then the excavator has to do their part and find them vertically as they're doing their work. Our exposure, is huge. This fiscal year, we've had 3 months in a row of over 8,000 locate requests, and we locate all utilities in-house in John McCarthy's area. Some of our efforts to prevent these damages, we've had Jacksonville Sheriff's Office officers on the streets inspecting job sites, ensuring that contractors have locate tickets and that they're following the rules. We've had over 200 inspections since we began the program in February, and a handful of tickets have been written. We've had outreach to contractors, for example, 811 education staff and our locates manager, Warren DiNapoli, have worked with AT&T and their contractor, and Warren happens to sit on the board of directors for 811 Sunshine State One Call. Warren will be participating in a National Utility Contractors Association damage prevention roundtable here in Jacksonville in August. And we will begin reporting contractors to the Florida Department of Business and Professional Regulation to highlight those not doing the right thing. And finally, we will explore legislative efforts to strengthen the existing law. And with that, I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Is there a mapping issue, or these negligent contractors, multiple root causes? What's going on here?
Yeah, we have very low damages, and as I said, the area belongs to John McCarthy, but I know that Warren has bragged about we're one of the top in the state in terms of locate accuracy. We have a very good GIS in most cases, and it's really in most of these events, and as I said, these are billed when the contractor is liable. So that means our paint was right. It just means somebody didn't do their thing and they hit us.
And why are we not getting recovery from the city? With apologies to Ms. Rohde's department.
That part I'm not sure on. When we started looking at the issue, and I think Melissa had said we would get back to the board on it, we started digging in, and that's when, no pun intended, and that's when we found that we have built significantly, but our cost recovery this year is not that great. So
what is not that great? 10%?
About 175,000 recovered so far.
Out of 1.2 million?
Yes, sir.
That's the reason for us bringing it in-house.
75,000 we did get back, I can promise you that.
So you mentioned that we're issuing tickets. The tickets amount to what? Is it a penalty?
Tickets,
Is it there a?
Yes, ma'am. The ticket in the one call statute allows, I think it's a $500 fine, and there's certain things listed in the statute that you can give a ticket for, any law enforcement officer can do. So $500 compared to the production rate that they're making out there is low risk. What you can't bill, or what you can't ticket for, is failure to spot vertically. We found that out. So we believe that's a huge flaw in the existing statute. We have reduced some of our liability by not rebuilding the roads. What you see there, we bedded our pipe down and then left it between DOT and the excavator to fix the road. So we have reduced that liability.
Well, it's good to hear that the city is assisting from the standpoint of slowing the contractors down so that they can pay more attention. But I don't know how that helps us with a $1.2 million problem, only being able to assess $500. So the next question is, how do we move forward? How do we combat this?
I have a question. In the statute, I'm sorry, I'm not familiar with this. Is there an opportunity for public shaming? Can we get a list of these contractors that are causing repeated issues and
Yes, sir.
hold them up with a scarlet A or something?
I guess there's nothing that would prevent us from posting our spreadsheet of damages at JEA.com. It is a public record. It is a public record.
That's something we are exploring, is just including a contractor scorecard. for some of the subcontractors to the communications
That's a better way of
companies.
saying it. Public shaming, contractor scorecard.
It's also important, though, to recognize these are subcontractors to major communication companies, and it's the responsibility of the communication companies, too, to make sure that their contractors are following the law.
There's nothing that prevents contractors too during the design phase to come work with us, and that's part of what Warren did with AT&T. I mentioned the work that they had done with AT&T, is come see the data that we have prior and plan your work accordingly, so when the driller or the heavy construction guy hits the field with his backhoe, he knows what's in the ground below, and so production is not held up.
Thank you.
Thank you.
welcome.
I have a quick question regarding the water outages that we've had in the month of May. What are some of the personal communication from a customer service standpoint to the customers during those outages?
That's a great question. You want to take that one?
Yes, so if it results in a boil water notice, we work through environmental, and we get that information out through different channels, as I understand. The one in particular for May, a pipe was in a bind, and when our crew was actually tapping it, we knew where our pipe was, by the way. But as we tapped it, it split out, so it was a relatively large outage. I think about 1,100 customers were affected. But the pipe was in a bind, and it split on us, but we get word out as best we can.
What's the time frame of a repair?
A repair that large, it was a number of hours.
Hours.
No doubt. Yeah.
Any other questions?
Yeah, follow up on that. So do we not do any, and maybe this is to Ms. Stewart instead of you, Darrell, but any communications regarding the overall pressures on the system that say, hey, this is a great time to remind customers to conserve water and reduce their usage? I mean, and how is that broadcast out? Sorry if it was done and I didn't see it.
We actually did. We've got together with Carrie's group and game planned what our responses to the community and customers would be. We did make the messaging about fire protection as number one for us, and we worked specifically with Nocatee and their management folks. I'm not sure if we did other
We also
other
partner
communities.
with multiple media sources, TV, radio, as well as print, to be able to try and get the information out in as many forms and formats as possible for the customers to be able to consume it.
The thrust of the messaging is to shift irrigation times to times that don't line up with our peak flows in the water system so that we can better manage pressure. And we particularly targeted communities where we had the biggest pressure issues.
Okay. So we've got the ability to target that, geofence where the issue is,
Yeah, good point.
irrigate all.
We put it on the website, we put it out, we partner with
Okay.
media, we try and use as many outlets and channels as possible to get the message out.
I think it's important that we be able to do that in a timely, basis, so you can get that, reduce the pressure as it's happening.
The number one issue is that most irrigation is automated and run by a control panel, and it requires somebody to want to go actually change the automation. You're anything like me, I just
don't
recently
have
did it. It's not intuitive,
Yeah.
the way they design sprinkler systems, so.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, Ms. Stewart, now it's your turn for flex pricing.
Good morning, Madam Chair and board members. I'm here today to give you an update on the pilot formerly known as the demand rate pilot. We have changed the name, as you've seen. I think the last time we talked, we had changed the name to Flex Pricing Pilot Update. We are testing 2 different rates. I want to talk to you a little bit about our progress to date. I want to give you a look at some of the metrics that we're already starting to take a look at. I want a brief update on the home energy management pilot, which is a subset of the pilot, and then what to expect going forward. So again, we've had about 100 employees working on this pilot, some as many as 5 years, waiting for the launch. Again, we launched on June 1, so we'll be anticipating the first bills hitting these customers' mailboxes or inboxes in July, some as soon as next week. There are about 2,500 participants in the pilot. We have established a call center within our call center. We were calling it E14, and it's 14 of our best customer advisors have taken on the task of getting extra training so that they can handle the very complex questions that will come up and are managing to educate. And I'll give you an idea of some of the calls that are coming in a moment. We also have created and deployed baseline, intercept, and exit surveys, and we'll see some of those numbers here coming up. So some of the numbers that we are looking at, on the left-hand side of the slide, you'll see the numbers we've already talked about, a little over 2,500 in the treatment group. You'll see how they're broken out there. We have a 20,000 customer control group, and the home energy management technology participants, you'll see few of them now. We'll see more of those as the year moves forward and the technology, we get some of the bugs out of the technology. What's interesting, though, is on the charts and graphs that you see on the right-hand side. We've had about 200 customers call. All customers received multiple communications over the course of April and May to let them know that they had been selected to be in the pilot. And about 200 of our customers have called, basically reacting to the communications that they received. And you'll see there on the chart, we've been able to retain most of them. The red is not bad. The red means that the primary reason for the call was education, and we were able to retain them in one of the pilots that they were enrolled in. A little anecdote here, one of our E14 customer advisors gave us a little taste of the calls that are coming in. Crystal Ulrich, she's been with JEA for a very long time. She had a customer call in a few weeks ago. He received his bill, he knew he was on the pilot, and his bill was a lot more than it was in May. And Crystal informed him that while you are on the pilot, you won't be receiving your first bill on the pilot rate until July. You're actually seeing your bill from a very hot May. And so she was able to go into the system, recalculate what his bill would have been had he been on the demand rate or on the flex rate, and his bill would have been lower. So he's looking forward to July. We kept him in the pilot, and those are the kinds of things that we're working just really hand-to-hand combat on this with our customers. They are, the folks that have stayed in are very curious. Lots of the phone calls are lengthy in terms of educating the customer. They have a lot of questions about it, but we're really excited that so far only about 60 of our customers that are in the pilot have opted out. The technology pilot. This is something that, again, is the first smartphone residential demand control technology that has been deployed in the country. We've talked about this before. It's a little buggy right now, so we're working through a lot of those issues with the few customers that we have on it. But we're providing information and or control for managing the customer's demand, because what we know is that on average, customers' bill, if they manage it using the education that we give them, their bills will go down about 7%. But combine that with technology and automated control from their smartphone, their bills can go down as much as 17%. So we're really looking forward to a wider deployment of this technology. And then looking ahead, as I said, we just launched in June, so the first bills won't hit the inbox or the mailbox until July. We've had substantial participant feedback. Almost 10% of the folks that are in the pilot that we've communicated to have called us to ask for more information. And we've created a response team that's been established to quickly mitigate any participant pain points that will arise. Right now, we know it's the quiet before the storm, so E14 is handling the roughly 200 calls that have come in over the last month, but we know that's going to ramp up starting next week when the bills start to come in. And I didn't include this screenshot in the package that was sent out, but I thought it was interesting, and if you like, I can send you a link to this. But this is our GIS system, and these are all of the customers that are in the Flex pilot. And you can see that they're dispersed quite evenly throughout our service territory. And the box that you see there is if you were to scroll over the dot on the map, you would be able to see a lot more information about that customer, which rate they're on, when their last read was. We could also click further into that, into different systems, to find out what's going on with that customer. It makes it a lot easier for our customer advisors when customers do call in. I thought it was an interesting graphic, and I'm sorry I didn't include it in your initial package. And with that, I'll take any questions that you have.
Ms. Stewart, the 364 participants that are utilizing technology, is that we provided them the technology, or they already have smart homes and are utilizing technology in their home?
We're providing them the technology.
Okay.
We
I
are
thought that
actually,
number would be higher for people that want to participate using the technology.
we are being selective in how we roll it out. It's a first of a kind, and so as with anything, you want to be very cautious on how you hand out betas. That we've, amazingly enough, with all the talk about smart homes and smart buildings and smart cities, off-the-shelf kits that allow for you to have a fully integrated software, hardware approach to what they call demand-side management within the house just doesn't exist. And so
We're building
carrying,
it.
yeah, we're building it along with the software, which is, fascinating and monumental effort, but you can see some of the results.
We're talking to the employees that may want to participate from utilizing the technology.
Absolutely. Your CFO is actually one of our guinea pigs. So we have the folks that were in the pre-pilot that were the opt-in, and most of those were employees or families of employees. And so we do get a lot of feedback from them.
Good.
He's relatively fiscally conservative, so it's awkward when he stops a meeting and says he has to call his wife to turn off the appliance.
What are some of the reasons why participants are opting out?
Don't understand the rate, think it's a rate increase, don't believe that it's really a pilot, don't like change, want to wait until it rolls out to the rest, don't want to be a guinea pig. So,
Understand?
yeah, fear of change.
Yeah. And we're doing everything that we can do to provide them with much explanation and communication, so
Absolutely.
you're going to have that fallout. Any other questions from the board?
Yes. How long will this pilot last, and what's the next step to grow participation in the program?
So this initial phase will last for a year, and then we will make changes going forward. Then we will have enough data to decide whether or not the rates are achieving all of the goals that we've set out. Is it good for the customer? Is it good for JEA? And then we will make decisions from that point forward. But this pilot will go on for an entire year. We want to see how seasonality affects the rate, and we want to understand customer adoption and customer sentiment. And so we'll need to see them in all 2 seasons that Jacksonville has.
But no definitive plans for further rollout at this time.
Not right now.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
I'm thinking about, as the seasons change, especially in the warmer climate, in the warmer months, that you may have more participants that want to drop out. So how are we going to encourage them to see so that we can see an entire picture, an entire year? How do we encourage them to stay in the program?
So the devil is in the details. And when you start a pilot, you want to ensure that you're going to get the strongest customer adoption and the best customer sentiment. And so these rates actually perform well in high usage months for people that are high consumers. And so we've been very careful about the participants that we've selected to be in the pilot, as well as starting in months that are particularly warm. So we know that if they take the education seriously, their bills will be lower from a year-over-year perspective because of the heat. So we were going to start either in a hot month or a cold month, and so it was intentional.
Good. All right. If there's no further comments or questions, thank you, Ms. Stewart.
Thank you.
All right. As everyone may remember, last month we asked the senior leadership presented what is considered status quo. We're naming it status quo. It's what JEA will look like if we continue to do things just the way we do them today. And we challenged the leadership to go and bring us back some options, some various scenarios of how we react, how do we respond to the evidently changing trends in our industry. So next up, we will do that. And who's presenting today?
Thank you. You actually have a team of people.
Oh, we have the entire
You
leadership team.
do.
Okay.
You have Ms. Dykes, Mr. Wanamaker, and Mr. Anton Durkett, who is a senior partner from McKinsey. First, I'm going to allow Ms. Rohde to read the disclaimer.
The following financial projections are presented solely for JEA Board of Directors planning and action in connection with the development of a strategic plan. They are not a projection of future financial performance, and as such, should not be relied upon by present or prospective JEA bond investors to purchase or sell any security or to make an investment decision. The remainder of this disclaimer is available in the board packet, and I encourage you to read it.
There's some confusion in the past about why we put this disclaimer in there, and I think it's important for everyone to understand that we have publicly traded securities that are governed by the Securities and Exchange Commission, and this disclaimer is a requirement in order to comply with those laws and regulations, and is nothing more than us complying with the law. To that point, one of the reasons I'd asked Mr. Durkett to join us is I also think that it's important to understand, and we'll talk a little bit about this through the entire presentation, that all of the scenarios that we're putting forward are not scenarios developed solely by JEA's senior leadership team. We utilize McKinsey, and I'll ask them, Anton, to introduce McKinsey and some of their experience, but we're leveraging some of the best and brightest minds in the business, as well as utilizing our public power associations and other industry associations to be able to draw on some of the best data.
Thank you very much. Madam Chair, the board members, I would like to start with a quick introduction of what McKinsey is, which you, I'm sure, may know. McKinsey is the leading management consulting firm with deep experience in the power sector, among other industries. Over the past number of years, we've been engaged with investor-owned utilities and publicly owned utilities on challenges not dissimilar to what we've been discussing with the management team and with you over the past few months. So we'd like to start the presentation today with a quick reminder of where we are in the process, and then I will spend maybe a couple of minutes just talking about the scenario-based strategic planning, and then I'll pass the ball to the JEA management team to give you an update on where we are. But as you know, over the past few months, JEA management team, with our support, has been engaged in pretty detailed, iterative scenario-based planning of what JEA future may look like. And some of that was presented to you a few weeks ago as a part of Status Quo 1. In our experience, scenario-based always begins with intelligence gathering to understand where we are going, what the nature of our strategic problem. And that was the gist of Status Quo presentation, as you all may reflect on this. The purpose of that phase was also to look at what we describe as minimization of residual uncertainty. So we would like to do, in simple language, we would like to do a number of analysis to really understand some of the some of the facts, to make sure that some of the unknown factors become a bit more a bit more known to us. Examples of that were, for example, technology evolution. So we looked at cost of solar, cost of storage, to make sure that some of these unknowns become more notable, more understandable. Now, we are moving towards the next phase of the exercise, which we'll talk about today. So why is it important for us to rely on scenario-based strategic planning instead of just focusing on single-point future and plan for that? And as you can imagine, as we embarked on this journey, we had a number of very interesting high-energy discussions with the management team about what process to follow here. And ultimately, there was a number of reasons why we believe that scenario-based strategic planning was of the most significant value here. One was we didn't want to fall into what we describe as stability bias. Or in other words, no one wanted to assume that the future will look like the past. And so that's one of the core pillars of scenario-based planning. When you start looking at what the outcomes may look like, when you start thinking about the strategic variables, in order not to fall into a stability bias when you just predict that the future is just extrapolation of the past. Another one which we actually looked at as a part of the scenario-based planning was to ensure that we have very open and extensive dialogue. So it's not what we describe as a groupthink bias, when basically the opinion of strategy, which we've seen in other companies, falls basically on the shoulder of one or two leaders who formulate effectively the strategy and make everyone fall into the place. That was very opposite of that. There was a lot of, and still very ongoing conversation about what the future may look like, what assumptions we should be making. Last but not least, what we also see some of your peers in the public and investor-owned space, when they deviate from scenario-based planning, they fall into what we describe as availability bias. They just rely on information readily available to them without making a big investment of time and effort, like we saw here, in understanding the trends, understanding how the future may, again, deviate from what we know about it. And so what we believe JEA management team, with our support, delivered here so far is that a number of well-thought-through scenarios which address some of these biases, which looked at the future, which is somewhat different from what we learned to expect from the past. And that positions us quite well to think about the strategic plan, to formulate strategic plan. I spoke to this board in January, and when we talked about the strategic plan, we talked about some of the key pillars of what strategic plan should look like. I would actually maybe even start with number 2, and then it's a clearly articulated vision for the future. I think the scenarios that we've been putting forward together with the management team is a step forward toward articulating what this future may look like for us. I would also say that over the past few months, as an integral part of the strategic planning process, there was a great deal of alignment being built across the organization at all levels in understanding the nature of our strategic challenge. So there is no more, if you will, a point of view that only the senior management of the company shares, but a lot of the strategic challenges have been explained in details to all the levels of the organization to make sure there's alignment, there's a buy-in towards the future. So going forward, we will talk today about the traditional response, right? It is one of the scenarios. It is one of the scenarios where basically we were thinking about what it takes to solve the problem using the way how traditionally utility may respond to some of these challenges. That's not the full solution space, right? And then that will be a part of a strategic plan going forward, which will rely on aligned organization, discrete number of initiatives that will go beyond traditional responses, as well as the owners and the clear means to account for progress as towards our future vision. So let me pause here and
So before we get into the scenario 2, I'm going to do a review of scenario 1, the status quo scenario that we presented last month. The Energy Policy Act of 2005 has had a dramatic impact on the electric utility industry. Since the act, commercial consumption per customer is down 30%, and residential consumption per customer is down 17%. And you can see that from the red lines on these slides. These lower sales had led to an 8% decrease in overall electric sales over the past decade, despite adding nearly 65,000 new customers. In order to handle high debt levels, increasing city contributions, and higher operating expenses, JEA raised base rates 71% on electric and 72% on water. We eliminated 407 positions and repaid over $3 billion in debt. But it wasn't enough. The last decade was marked by energy efficiency and the emergence and maturation of solar and other renewable energy technologies. Since 2014, JEA has seen a 67% annual growth in solar, which is reducing net income by about $2.5 million per year. It's continuing to grow. As we've discussed, we're seeing similar trends in the battery storage technology. Battery adoption is at the beginning of the curve, but it is demonstrating similar trends to solar adoption. Most importantly, from a business perspective, by the mid-2020s, we expect customers to be able to self-serve with the solar and battery system at a cheaper price than JEA can provide. So the status quo analysis projects that our sales will decline, will continue to decline on the electric system. By 2030, we'll increase customers by 16%, and sales will fall another 8%. You can see on the chart on this page that all the sales growth associated with new customers will continue to be offset by growth in energy efficiency, Distributed energy will continue to grow and further reduce our sales. We do expect electric vehicle adoption to have a positive growth driver, but we still project to lose around 1 million megawatt hours per year in sales. So given these dynamics, the market in the status quo, with no action by JEA, it would result in a 52% electric base rate increase and a 16% water base rate increase. We'd still have a high debt load of over $4.8 billion when you factor in our expected plant Vogtle obligations. It's worth noting on the status quo that it does not assume substantial off-grid movement by commercial and industrial customers, which make up about 11% of our total customers, but account for 55% of our sales. In fact, our top 10 customers account for about 10% of our energy revenue. The thing about those top 10 customers is that almost all of them have publicly stated sustainability goals. A faster adoption of off-grid technologies by our largest customers would further exacerbate a decline in sales.
May I interrupt for a moment, Madam Chair?
Sure.
Have we done any sensitivity analysis around what the movement off-grid from those top 10 customers might be, even if it's by a factor of 10%, 15%?
So we have, in the context of our projections, we looked at the system as a whole. We did not go through a customer by customer, bottoms up approach. It was much more of a broad analysis. So we haven't done that level of customer by customer analysis.
We have not designed a scenario that incorporates a substantial increase in C&I departure relative to load.
Yeah.
Why not? That seems like something we should do.
Happy to come back and present it. In fact, actually, what we can do is we can't prepare for this month, but I'm certainly happy to. It would be an easy change for us to make, and what we could do at next the board meeting is run the status quo analysis plus our traditional utility response analysis, and be able to incorporate those assumptions at the top line. That would be easy to do.
I think that's important. 7 of 8 of our top 10 private customers have said they're going to reduce usage.
So I've actually gone and spoken with most of them. Most of them have already actually reduced dramatically. Florida Blue actually has reduced by over 40% in the last 10 years while growing.
So we can expect the others to follow suit.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you.
It gets a bit shocking, let me share a little bit of a personal story. This weekend I was with my daughter in a bathing suit in Home Depot and looking at LED light bulbs because I had to switch out some of the McCann light bulbs, and one of our employees on the black belt team was actually sitting there walking in front of me back and forth. He didn't recognize me because different between a suit and tie and a bathing suit. And finally I stopped him and said, "Hey, how are you doing?" He goes, "Oh, I was just thinking about how I'm taking sales away." But it's interesting, a concept that people are now really, at least internally at JEA, we're starting to realize that the behaviors of our customers are having dramatic impacts on our core business.
Thank you.
So as Mr. Wanamaker talked about, technology disruption is an industry-wide issue. It's not just a JEA issue. And all of the utilities are trying to find a way to navigate. The energy and water utility industry is not alone, though. Interestingly enough, many other industries have seen the substantial disruption from technology and have had to recalibrate their approach. Unfortunate for us, for the public and for this board, most of the discussions and decision-making of these companies and the exemplary brands that are on this page is not oftentimes available because it's done behind closed doors. One truth does exist, though, that what differentiates some of the best brands on this page from those that actually have failed is that a unified board of directors, stakeholder base, employee base made difficult decisions absent a time of crisis. And we're able to position with a solidarity of purpose and vision and allow the company to navigate difficult trends well in advance as opposed to playing defense while sidelined by turmoil. This page is an interesting page. The picture on the left is a map of the actual disruption within our service territory. It is a map of each and every JEA customer that has installed and adopted solar. Amazingly, the dots on this page, while they would number well over 2,000, would only have numbered in around 50 some 5 years ago. Again, this is not a JEA issue. It's a system-wide, or it's a nationwide and worldwide issue. The chart on the right is actually from the U.S. Energy Information Association Administration, and demonstrates the massive expansion of renewables over the last 10 years. Notably, on that chart, the green is wind, which was effectively the initial renewable that started to see adoption in the Midwest and other parts of the United States. The top bar, which is the yellow and solar, is just now starting to see the acceleration, much like what we are starting to see in our service territory. Companies are like the humans that run them. They grow and they evolve as time and experience shapes them. And as the markets in which they exist change, they adopt and innovate, or they decline. Interestingly enough, on the left-hand side of this chart are the 11 basic tools that most companies utilize in the face of maturation of their business. They're basic tools. They're things like increasing prices. JEA has certainly done that in the past. They are things like investing in research and development, in IP. You're familiar with that in other industries where you start to see an iPod to an iPod Touch to a phone to an iPad, to moving through different iterations of technologies and keeping up with the trends of the consumer. All of these 11 items are certainly the tools that, as we have been going through scenario strategic planning, your management team, your employees, McKinsey, and a number of community leaders have been coming up with initiatives that fit in one of these buckets to try and think about how does JEA innovate and be a part of the market. Examples with non-traditional strategies are on this page. Very rarely is the entire strategic journey actually recalled, because most oftentimes we remember just the most recent news article or remember the most recent product release. I put General Electric on this slide to demonstrate, this is a company that was founded in 1892. The company and its brand has a long history of successful pivots in changing market conditions, much like Apple and Amazon and Bloomberg and Goldman Sachs and FedEx. Each of them recognize specific trends ahead of time and position the company to capitalize on the trends and be a part of it and drive it, as opposed to playing defense. Yet only recently has JEA's board and management team made a misstep. It was a sizable one with the acquisition of Alstom. Interestingly enough, at the very same time in the last decade, as our industry has been seeing weakening demands, JEA made a very large financial bet on becoming the leading equipment and service supplier. And now we see the results of that. This is proof that all market changes both present an opportunity, as have been demonstrated by a number of other companies on this page, as well as present substantial risk. And I'm happy that this board and the community are having the conversation around JEA, because certainly, while I think a lot has been made of what people call doom and gloom of what we're talking about, there are also very positive opportunities that lie ahead of us. Interestingly enough, though, while most companies have 11 tools, JEA has 3. And we have 3, and for 125 years, these tools have been relatively effective, as we have maintained solid energy and water utilities for our customers and for our city. As we look forward, though, the opportunities in electrification, distributed energy resources, decentralized water, data as an asset, the big data movement, all of the generally require different skill sets and different tools and approaches than the traditional utility. This analysis, as we're about to present, which is the traditional utility response, is ultimately been derived by utilizing only the tools available to JEA. We have conducted a legal review, and in Appendix C, you can actually see a little bit more detail around these constraints. And effectively what we've done is as the team has been creating and we've been engaging the union leaders, the senior leadership team, our directors, our managers, as we've been creating initiatives, we've been running them through what we call a constraint screen and evaluating whether the Constitution of the state of Florida has a constraint, whether public servant constraint, the charter constraint, Florida statutes, bond resolutions, policy considerations, business structure. And ultimately, in the event that an initiative or a growth initiative or a cost initiative ultimately ran into a constraint, we put it into a parking lot and didn't consider it in the traditional utility response. So we have created the catalog, but we haven't put them into this scenario. With that being said, I will now hand it over to Melissa Dykes to walk through what a traditional utility response is, utilizing each and every tool available to JEA today, absent dramatic change.
Under the status quo scenario that we presented last month, we got a good look at what the trajectory is for the business if we continue on as we are without a deliberate strategic response from management. This scenario, as Aaron mentioned, utilizes the tools that we have at our disposal today, but also recognizes the constraints that we have today. As we consider our 4 measures of value, customer, community, environmental, and financial, last month's scenario had the biggest degradation in financial value for customers. This month, we shift more of that financial burden back to JEA, but you're also going to see accompanying degradation in the other measures of value that come with an austere financial approach. The basic long-term outcome is the same. Under the constraints that were outlined in this prior section that Aaron described, the business does decline. This scenario includes a management response that better positions the business in the long term from a risk and customer impact perspective around that decline. A few things to note about what is and is not included in this scenario. This is a second scenario, and it's part of our strategic planning process. It's not necessarily the most likely scenario, but it's one that was prepared to help hone in on the best path forward through this strategic planning process. It's intended to provide clarity and choices. And as with all scenarios, there may be parts of it that make sense to include in any scenario going forward, even if this isn't the right scenario fit for JEA. It's obviously not a substitute for our IRP or IWRP. And with that, let's dive right in. Because of the constraints presented in the earlier section, we are left with 2 primary tools. Those tools are cost reduction and rate increases. Cost reduction tools like headcount reduction, lower CapEx, and other O&M reductions are maximized in this scenario to minimize rate increases. There are a few limited growth initiatives that are also included, although the growth doesn't really materially change the trajectory for the business under our current constraints. In this scenario, we start with a cash gap of $3.2 billion. One really important element of this scenario is that JEA still has a fundamental problem for a shrinking business, and that is that we've got far too much debt. This scenario also includes a glide path to a smaller business through the reduction of debt, particularly in the years before we reach grid parity for alternative energy supplies. So under this scenario, the cash gap actually widens by an additional $1.2 billion. We include headcount reductions that help close that gap by $1.6 billion. Other cost-saving initiatives will close $2.1 billion of it, but the cost cuts alone can't close the entire gap, and so we're left with a 26% electric rate increase that's needed to fund the remainder of that gap. In the next pages, I'll walk through each of these cost reduction initiatives, starting with headcount reduction. This scenario is austere. It includes a 30% reduction in force over the next 10 years or a loss of 574 jobs. Those headcount reductions are not without significant consequences for our customers. With fewer employees, customers will experience a substantial reduction in service, degradation in reliability, environmental impacts, and less community engagement. These headcount reductions are not just rank and file employees, though. It also includes a substantial reduction in the senior leadership team. Our leadership team today is designed for sophisticated strategy and execution. Under this scenario, that team would be reduced and flattened to plot a course toward a continually shrinking business, focused on running the business, but largely abandoning focused efforts around innovation, research and development, and strategy for business evolution. Because the purpose of the scenario is to minimize the financial impact on customers to the extent possible, reductions in the other 3 measures of value are expected. We would recommend canceling the construction of our new headquarters building and move to space on the south side. This move reduces overall costs, but of course negatively impacts our customers and community by moving us and our employee base out of downtown. This scenario also includes reductions in capital in both systems. We would reduce investments in generation, the distribution grid, substituting purchase power where possible, and guiding the system down a shrinking sales path. We also significantly reduced spending in technology. In water, we can defer certain rehabilitation projects and resiliency improvements. The impact of these reductions in capital is a decrease in reliability and ability to support new development, along with a possible increase in emergency-related repair costs and greater environmental noncompliance issues. These capital and operating cost reductions yield a cost savings of $3.7 billion over the next 10 years, but it's at a cost to the other measures of value for JEA. The scenario is not all bad news. There are certain revenue-generating initiatives that can be implemented under our existing constraints, and those are expected to generate about $389 million in net revenue over the next 10 years. The initiatives include things like expanded electrification, our real estate optimization strategy that we discussed with the board several months ago, a new online marketplace for customers, and implementation of a residential solar application fee. Even after the collection of cost reduction initiatives, though, there's still a cash gap remaining that has to either be filled with an electric rate increase of 26% or an electric rate increase of 13% coupled with no city contributions at all past 2023. On the water side, the good news is that we are actually able to close that cash gap in the water and wastewater system and avoid a water rate increase. This page shows a comparison of outcomes between last month's status quo and this scenario, including management's response under our existing constraints. We're able to reduce the electric rate increase from 52% last month to 26% and eliminate the need for a water rate increase. And we did that by reducing headcount by more than 30%, reducing our debt burden by 31%, and reducing the increase in operating expenses pretty substantially in this scenario. By taking this austere approach, the scenario positions JEA for continued shrinking of the business by aggressively reducing both debt and expenses, but with trade-offs against the other measures of value.
Thank you. I'd like to go back to this because I think it's important to point out that while the traditional utility response, I've heard from a number of people that it seems unacceptable, it is basically just like the last 10 years. As we think about that, though, I don't believe that, certainly given the fact that I'm not sure, I asked somebody recently, when's the last time in 125 years the CEO of JEA said you probably need to think about letting myself and a bunch of senior leadership team members go, and I think the answer was absolutely never. But it is what you need to do in the face of a declining business, and if you're going to be a prudent board and think about how to run the business in an ever-shrinking market environment. I will tell you what I look at is more of the non-traditional path, and I'm excited about it. As I said in the prior section, in a changing market environment, there are thousands of opportunities ahead of us. Yes, there are challenges, but there are also opportunities that can be quite exciting. A non-traditional utility response would assume that we are innovating to win, that we are focusing on growth, that new business models and public-private partnerships and extension of core service offerings are provided to our customers just in line with the trends that we are seeing. It would require that JEA adopt emerging technology, drive new business models of utility system operation through big data management. It would modify our business model and approach to our customers and the way we serve them and the services that we provide. And it would consider new market and rate designing, much like the flex price pilot that we talked about earlier. A non-traditional utility response would require charter changes in order to alleviate some of the constraints and allow for JEA to be able to participate in this market. And it would require JEA to, instead of cutting jobs, invest in its employees and provide the appropriate incentives to drive the growth and the behaviors necessary to drive the company forward. This means that we will have to proactively create the circumstances in which will enable us to remain relevant today, tomorrow, and in the future, by looking at the technology and the policies, the customers, and the capital required to succeed. Interestingly enough, JEA, counter to a lot of popular belief, this is not a conversation we just started last month. We started it well over a year ago. JEA began by bringing in some of the most leading minds in the industries around us to Jacksonville and partnered with the Jacksonville Chamber, JTA, and TPO to put on the Innovation Summit. As a recap, I think it would be interesting to see about some of the things we talked about.
Change is accelerating in our markets at a pace faster than we've ever seen before.
Our infrastructure is meant to serve our cities, our citizens, our businesses.
And we're going to have to figure out what the next wave of infrastructure looks like.
In order to have quality of life, you've got to have good infrastructure.
As public entities, we have the community's best interest at heart.
As we move forward, we'll be looking at microgrids, smart homes and buildings. We'll be looking at renewable energy. We'll be looking at all of the different facets of the energy ecosystem and the energy economy. And the JEA of the future will be more of the center of that energy economy than just the centralized dominant supplier that we are today.
We need to understand how the entire economy is affected by exponentially growing technologies, by accelerating technologies. And once we have that understanding as to where individuals are going, what businesses are going through, and also what entire societies are going through, that is when we can build good infrastructure to serve that purpose.
We have a vision where we want to improve the lives of each and every person as well as accelerate the economy.
We can think beyond quarterly earnings, we can think about the long term, we can reflect the values of the community.
There's been a revolution in the way we get things done. This revolution was enabled by the internet and by the first generation of mobile technologies. Thanks to exponential technologies, everyday things, everyday objects are going to become intelligent.
We think we can be the bridge between the great ideas and take the skills and the knowledge that we possess as a company and accelerate those to the mass market adoption.
We need to create safe environments for people to be able to unlearn the way we've done stuff in the past. Because innovation at the end of the day is a form of unlearning.
These weren't shallow insights. They're actually new insights into some of the deeper mechanisms of how the world works.
It was an opportunity to engage the community in an important conversation, especially when we as the utility and the transportation authority are on the precipice of such huge change in our businesses. This event was such a great opportunity to bring our whole community together around the idea of infrastructure innovation here in Jacksonville.
Walking into that room today and seeing the lineup, all the ideas that will be discussed, the people in the room excited to hear and learn, just makes me proud of our city.
Thank you very much.
So we end with a quote from Sue Kelly. Many of you may know Sue Kelly, many of you may not. Ms. Kelly has been an industry leader in public power for well over 35 years. She is a thought leader with significant insights into our market and the intricacies of the public power and public water utility that we run and have the privilege of having. Whether our community will listen to McKinsey, one of the worldwide leaders, whether they will listen to APPA, the nationwide leader in public power, whether they will listen to the U.S. Energy Information Administration, whether they will listen to this board, a host of industry publications, and Scott Madden, Utility Dive, WRF, WEFTEC, or others that we would be happy to provide as a management team, all of the messages are exactly the same. Now is the time for change for JEA. Confront challenges boldly and head on. And as a utility, we do have the opportunity to prosper. We can start figuring out how to grow and remain relevant and become the center of our customers' energy and water utility experience, and ultimately effectively drive each one of our 4 corporate measures of value. Shrink from the challenges, get embroiled in debate, and deny the inevitable. And my guess is that Ms. Kelly, as she was retiring after 35 years in public power, her quote will stand on its own. My request is that the board consider 2 alternatives. First, I ask that you instruct staff to finalize a traditional utility response in the event that we don't have the opportunity to grow change. And second, I ask that you consider allowing us the opportunity to look at our constraints and consider charter changes so that we can finalize a plan and bring it back to you in the future. The end.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Zahn, for that presentation. Thank you to the team, McKinsey. I'm sure this was not an easy task. And if it was easy, it wasn't pleasurable, knowing that it could affect the senior leadership team as well as you, Mr. Zahn. This is the process. This is the process that we asked for. We wanted to make sure that we were responding, and we need to make sure that we understand that this is just one option. This is the first response, as was stated, a traditional response. For some, I'm sure it's very shocking, and for others, it's not shocking. For those in the industry, may not be shocked at all, especially when you pay attention to some of the examples of other organizations that have been disrupted, and how quickly that disruption happened. So I'm glad that we're moving forward. I'd like to open it up to the board to discussion. Any comments? And
this is not theory, and we also have something to look back on that's proof of where it goes if we stay the same. It was stated by someone that innovation is a form of unlearning, and I think that's exactly where we are. You know, we have to do something, and I think that it's important for us to utilize the brain power that we have here at JEA. These are some of the smartest people in the world in terms of thinking futuristically. Our CEO and senior staff. And I think that we have to give them what they need in order to reach past where we are. The other side of it, and I was sitting here thinking, and I have been thinking about this for a long time, is that our community, what was stated today here, our community know very little about that. When you say we've lost revenue for the last 10 years, you know, that's almost unbelievable. We know it's a reality. And I think that what we've got to do is we've got to make sure that the things that we are learning, that we've got to make sure that bridge gets over to the community in terms of understanding, you know, where JEA really is. Because most people see this as a totally rich power that can sustain itself throughout history. And that's not where we are. So, and just listening today just, you know, made me relive, you know, where we are and what we need to do. And so at this point, as a board member, I'm willing to do whatever's necessary to make sure that JEA moves to a healthier road, because this is our community, you know, and the impact that it's going to have is on the people that we serve. They're ultimately the ones who have to pay the higher rates, and even in paying the higher rates, they're still going to lose many of the professionals that we have here that's keeping it going healthy at this point. So we just need to do whatever we need to do. That's my statement.
thank you.
Madam Chair, I have to first thank you for the presentation. I cannot imagine that it was easy. But this is insane. To think about the increases in rates, we've known for a while that the business hasn't been performing. To be in the position that we're in our second scenario is to let go of 30% of our workforce, 30% of our team members, 30% of our senior leadership team. I believe that the team that we've put in place certainly can have a better solution set. Over the last several months, goodness, last year, we've spent time truly crafting what I believe are very strong guiding principles, very solid core values that truly start to exemplify what JEA represents, and to turn around and be in a position to where I'm frustrated. To be in a position to where 30% of a senior leadership team we've spent time putting in place to really help elevate the organization. Certainly chairing a comp committee right now that's talking about how can we put in place long-term incentives to elevate the financial value of the company. Thank you again for the status quo 1 and 2, but no. I understand the different scenarios of rate increase versus 52% versus the 26%. But I think that we've got to charge forward and do what's necessary to truly continue to elevate the company that we've started creating, recreating the true foundation of.
I would ask a response to board members' comments from the standpoint of, she made the comment that we haven't been performing, but when in fact we have been performing and we have been doing things such as the 5x5 reduction plan. Talk a little bit about that, about the efforts that we've been doing leading up to this point.
I'd be happy to respond. My first comment is to say thank you. This was a terrible process to go through. It's a very human process, and it's one that recognizes the realities of the challenges that we're facing. But especially when you start touching your team members, it's a very painful process, even to paint a scenario that looks like this one. And so I appreciate your comments on that. We have been pursuing innovation. We've been pursuing alternative lines of business. We've been pursuing ways to bolster our revenue for years. And what we continue to run into is the constraints that Aaron talked about during the presentation. We've had some small successes. We've had the ability to do things like harvest timber, which is a fantastic source of revenue once every 20 years. And we've set up a small natural gas business on the marketing side, which we're able to do under our charter, but it's a very, very low source of marginal revenue. It's more of a customer satisfier than it is a source of revenue. But for the most part, the businesses that we've chased that would have helped to bolster our revenue are ones that have run smack into the wall of those constraints that we talked about. And so it's not a lack of recognizing these challenges for years, and it's not a lack of trying to implement the right things for the business. It's a reality of what we're able to do under our current constraints and structure.
Understood. Thank you. Any other?
It's not too late. You can probably just step out now and say,
Here comes the fire.
Yeah, talk about doom and gloom. Talk about doom and gloom. I think just as our city as a whole, we are growing. We're the fastest growing population in Florida. That just got released by the Tampa Bay Business Journal. And I think that as the face of the infrastructure, the traditional route is not acceptable. So, again, thank you for putting that together, because I came in here all excited and I'm a little bit depressed right now after that. But I want to leave here on a high note. And so, with that said, the innovation and things that the senior leadership team is thinking about and putting forward, I mean, these restraints for us as a company, as JEA, to not be able to apply and get into different streams of revenues, I definitely think we need to dig in and see how we can get on that side. So.
I echo several of the remarks that have already been made. Thank you to Mackenzie and to the senior leadership team. I also acknowledge it was a painful process and appreciate you going through that pain. I would have a couple of observations. I'm not sure why this is a surprise to anyone. The reality is that we've been talking about it for a long time. Senior leadership team and JEA have been aware of these trends for several years now. I commend Mr. Zahn and the entire senior leadership team for having the courage to confront the reality. I feel sorry for those citizens of municipalities whose power companies and water companies are not confronting this reality, because it's the kind of thing that takes a long lead time to address, and we need to move now to address it. Mr. Wanamaker, thank you for the refresher on the status quo that we heard last month. That was horrible. This is a little less horrible for the traditional utility response. I reject that traditional utility response is the right response. I think that we need scenario 3. We need to attack the X's that indicate constraints on JEA's ability to move forward as an innovative center of the energy economy for the 21st century. I implore the senior leadership team and Mr. Zahn to explore ways to turn these X's into checks. Quite frankly, we may not be able to amend the Florida Constitution to free up some of those constraints, but as we've demonstrated this past year, we have the ability to go to the legislature, present a compelling case for change, and receive authority to do things that need to be done. I think that we are working to educate the City Council and our community on the constraints that we are facing, and should have an opportunity to pursue charter changes that will allow us to move forward as well. I have one question for Mr. Zahn. I think I heard you say at the end of the presentation that you were looking for a motion from this board. Did you say to authorize implementation of status quo 2 while pursuing opportunities? Because I don't really like status quo 2, and I'd be concerned about any timing on implementing changes pursuant to status quo 2.
Yeah. This is one of those uncomfortable moments as a person.
Yeah.
I had we've been getting out and talking to all the employees about this because, you know, candidly, and I want to touch on what Ms. Dyke said. Traditional utility response has got a lot of uncertainty for our employees, and I will tell you, it is very real and having an impact already today. Just having this open conversation about multiple scenarios, what the future looks like, is unique to JEA. I think JEA's employees are used to a decision's made and then all of a sudden it's handed down and moving forward. But as I'm hoping everyone in the community is starting to see, it does require the courage of a community to have a robust conversation of what they want their utility to be. The traditional utility response is exactly what we have if we only use the tools we have. And I had an employee ask me, you know, what can you do to make the community like you better? And I said, well, you know, sadly for me, I took the job as a CEO, and my job's not to make people like me. It's to look after it's to look after yeah, it's to look after the customers, it's to look after our investors, it's to look after our employees, it's to do the things that are necessary, that I'm charged with as a fiduciary. And so what I believe is the necessary next step is that we have exhausted the tools, and so in July I would come back with effectively an execution and implementation plan of a traditional utility response. I'd like to do something on top of that, which is also come back with a strategy on how to pursue Florida statute changes and charter changes and constitution changes and map out that type of process so that, and you know, we've got Herschel Vineyard, and I will commend, you know, there's another element of this, which is ideas around growth, as Ms. Dykes talked about, are not new to JEA. And in fact, many employees and a lot of people have come up and through this last couple months and said, you know, I'm highly frustrated because I had this idea and it never went anywhere, right? Or the company pursued this, but it never went anywhere. And the work product that OGC, under Ms. Rohde's direction around mapping out these constraints, I think it was because there wasn't a clear appreciation for the constraints that JEA actually has. And so when an idea died on a vine, it wasn't then explained. And so as typically would happen is a great idea would rise, a lot of work and effort would go into making it become a reality, and then ultimately somebody would run into a statute issue or a constitutional issue or a charter issue, and it would effectively just be stopped without any sort of discussion at a board level. You know, and great examples of that are the liquid natural gas approach or the retail natural gas, the LDC approach. These were places where, you know, JEA did try to expand, and ultimately the conversation wasn't had with the city council of this is what JEA is trying to do, which is remain relevant in a market that's changing. So it's really a kind of a motion which would have two initiatives. One, come back with an execution and implementation plan on a traditional utility response, which is effectively all we have. The second is to allow us to go color outside the lines a little bit and think about how might we do what we did in the last legislative session, which is pass new laws. And think about how do you write those laws and what kind of, because when you write a law, you want it to be right. I mean, perfectly accurate and intend exactly what you mean. And that's going to take a lot of work. But I think it's, you've articulated it's worth the time and effort.
You need a motion, Madam Chair?
Well, I kind of want to follow up with your question of, we've all expressed our sentiment of the traditional response is not where we want to go. So is your idea of coming back and presenting the traditional response to show the gap that we still will not be where we need to be? Or what is the reason to, if we were in a consensus, to move forward with the traditional response?
Well, a non-traditional response will require 19 city council members to vote in a certain direction. It will require things that are external to the purview of this board of directors, or myself as the CEO. I don't think it is prudent for JEA to accept that, decisions like have been made in the past around liquid natural gas or retail natural gas, or places where JEA has tried to expand but ultimately run into a city council that has not been willing or accepting of that type of charge. I think it would be prudent. We have to have an implementation plan in the face of not obtaining alignment of our community and other external stakeholders that this board has no control over.
That's fair enough. That's fair enough.
Madam Chair, I move that the staff be directed to present to this board a plan for implementation of status quo 2 and a plan for proposal for exploring removal of constraints on opportunities to innovate the business. It's a terrible motion.
I second whatever that was.
Yeah, thanks. Somebody wrote it down.
We've got a second?
Yes, I second that motion.
Any discussion?
Again, I'm just going to say, I hate making that motion, but I think it's important, as Mr. Zahn noted, I hate it because I don't like the traditional response outlined in scenario 2. I do think that this board needs to see what that plan, what the components of that plan would be. Headcount reduction, rate increase, we've seen it in broad terms in today's presentation, but I believe this board needs to be fully informed and the community needs to be educated with the bucket of cold water to the face of what the future holds if we don't have the authority to make changes in our business model.
I agree. This is a part of the process. We need to see the process through. So if there are no further comments or questions, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, do the same. Motion approved.
Madam Chair, Mr. Howard, we will also bring back as part of that execution plan a sensitivity analysis that you asked for.
Thank you. On the major customers.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That was not fun.
At all.
We tried to end on a bright note, but as I've told the employees, I am not here to just implement a traditional utility response. I believe there's a lot of exciting opportunities if we just gain some alignment with our entire community.
Alrighty, we don't have any subject matter exploration this week. All right, we have a compensation committee report by Board Member Johnson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Coming off of what we just discussed, but in the last several months, we as a committee have been working with Towers Watson to put together a formal compensation framework. Just as a reference, we want to make sure that the overall framework aligns with our compensation philosophy, core values, guiding principles, a lot of things that we've talked about over the last several months. In putting in place the formal compensation policy, primarily focusing on short-term and long-term incentives and making sure that aligns with creating JEA's financial value. So we did go through all the specifics there, certainly, again, in contrast to what we just spoke about in status quo 2, but really making sure that we have a go-forward approach in creating a framework for our team members and all 2,000 employees. In light of that, I do, Madam Chair, I would like to entertain a motion. And if I don't do this right, well, it is what it is. But but I'd like to entertain a motion. I hereby motion that the JEA board and board of directors in direct engagement develop a market-based compensation program as recommended by the comp committee. The program should consist of base salary, short-term, long-term incentives, use the framework as developed by a third-party consultant, and the program should align with the total compensation philosophy and policy approved by the board of directors in January 2019, as further reviewed in March of 2019, as well as at our June meeting.
So in short, you want us to approve just the framework?
Correct. Okay. JEA's management development of the framework, correct.
And authorize staff to take such steps as to implement the program and bring it back for the board's final approval.
Correct. That is correct, yes.
Okay, can I get a motion?
That was a motion. Is there a second? Second.
There we go. Any questions, comments?
So, I'm sorry, so this is to approve the framework and require a plan to come back for final
That is
approval
correct.
to the board?
That is correct.
Okay.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Approved unanimously. It'll be interesting, especially in the middle of what we're doing right now, to have to talk about the compensation structure as much as it's needed when we talk about the potential of losing employees as well as our senior management and retention and long-term
And then ask
compensation
them at the same
incentives.
time to
Yeah.
put that together. So.
I think it's important for people to understand that the framework that was proposed and discussed within the compensation committee would effectively render a long-term incentive compensation that would be worthless in the face of traditional utility response.
Correct.
So ultimately, what it is incentivizing a growth trajectory. So I think that's an important distinction that everyone understand.
Alrighty, and I requested a corporate campus update. Is Ms. Nancy Kilgo here today?
Yeah.
Good morning, Madam Chair, board members.
Good morning.
Morning.
This may be a little tough update given the prior discussions, but I do want to give an update on the corporate headquarters project that we've been working on. JEA has worked very closely with Ryan since the selection meeting on April 2nd. JEA, Ryan, Office of General Counsel, and both companies' consultants have worked on lease negotiations, JSEB diversity program understanding and planning, exterior design planning and reviews, and we've had weekly detailed project team and communication team calls. JA and Ryan have continued to work on project planning since the intent to award. 2 conditions were set by the board upon approval. That was the negotiated lease be presented and site control within 90 days from that April 2nd date. That is July the 1st. I'll report on the site control first. Ryan immediately started the process to acquire the site through the city's process and the Downtown Investment Authority. The site was advertised for the required 30 days, and then the Investment Authority approved Ryan's offer to purchase in mid-May. The purchase and sale agreement then went to the City Council agenda to be considered. It was approved at 3 council committees last week and is on the council agenda to be approved tonight. David Edwards is here with us. He works with Edwards and Cohen as our outside counsel. We also have Mike Harrell and Stuart Green from CVRE here with us. Emerson Latzia of Office of General Counsel was on our team. And so the lease negotiations have been, I would say, thorough, sometimes tough. And we even sent a few changes yesterday. There are copies on the back table for things that we recognized over the weekend impacted timing that we had all agreed with. So David's going to do an overview from his perspective, and then we'll be able to answer further questions. One thing I do want to note, and David will also note, recently in the last couple of weeks, we have built in a termination provision whereby JEA has an opportunity to continue the strategic planning process you've talked about earlier. And so there is a 90-day termination clause in there for JEA to be able to complete its strategic planning. If we decide not to move forward, we would give the formal termination agreement to Ryan and reimburse them for their cost to date. David?
Can I stop there for a second?
Yes, sir.
Mr. Deek, can you stand up? Mr. Deek is the president of Ryan, and I want to say thank you. You guys have been a true partner to us, and our phone call about asking for that 90-day out, I know it was a hard one, but you responded as a partner, and I thank you for allowing us that level of flexibility as we navigate through how to continue the path of JEA.
Our pleasure. It's been great to work with your team.
It is highly unusual to have that level of partnership at the beginning, so thank you.
Thank you.
So as we've been saying, as we anticipated from the selection process, our choice of Ryan as a good partner proved true during the lease negotiations, and we anticipate that to continue through design and construction. The lease before you includes the main body of the lease, which essentially governs the terms once the building is completed, and then there's a lengthy construction addendum which governs the actual construction of the building. We have various exhibits which incorporate timing, budget, and the allocation of responsibility between the parties for construction aspects. At this point, we have Ryan constructing the building shell, and JEA will decide at a later date whether Ryan or another contractor will perform the tenant improvements. Part of what we've done since the award is tailoring the lease to the specifics of this project. We've added provisions for Ryan's purchase of the property from the city, a parking garage for JEA's exclusive use, and timing aspects related to this specific project. We've also added additional provisions to protect the JEA, such as the 90-day termination that Nancy mentioned, some interim milestones for Ryan to complete project tasks, an exhibit containing adjusted terms for the best and final offer to incorporate some additional controls and protections, including the JSEB and MWDBE goals, and a provision that allows JEA recourse if for some reason the project is substantially delayed or abandoned. We have followed through on negotiating the outstanding issues that were present at the time of award, such as working out issues with respect to JEA's rights of recourse for interruption of service, casualty, hazardous materials, working out assignment provisions, and also addressing issues if there end up being inconsistencies between the building plans and the tenant improvement plans. We've elected to forego the option to purchase in favor of a continuing right of first offer that will survive if JEA does not elect to purchase the property, but then additional sales occur in the future, and JEA would continue to have the right to first offer. We believe this will continue to be a good collaborative effort with Ryan as we move forward on design and locking in the pricing. As mentioned, the lease contains a detailed development responsibility allocation exhibit which allocates items for which Ryan is responsible with respect to the building shell and for which JEA is responsible for tenant improvement side. We feel that this helps avoid any ambiguity in the pricing going forward. We've also incorporated the budget and Ryan's invitation to negotiate response documents in order to further restrict the ability for the cost of the building to increase. Be glad to answer any questions, and as mentioned, we've got the CBRE people to help us. Mike Harrell, more on the business issues, and Stuart Green on the construction process.
Thank you for that. We just want to make sure that we're all involved in how the process is moving forward, so I appreciate that update. Any questions or comments from the board?
I'll add my thanks and appreciation to the Ryan team. I've been on several calls around the exterior building design. They've been very accommodating, very professional. I went through the lease this weekend, and I'm very pleased with how that's turned out. Many thanks to Dave Edwards, our outside counsel, and the Ryan team for that work. And to Nancy, and to Mike, and to Howard.
So is it going to have your initials on the
No,
outside?
no. But the design has changed, and it's really, really good.
I got a chance to see it. Looks good. All right, so it looks like we need a motion. Well, I was going to say.
Is that to approve Resolution 2019-05?
Correct.
Second.
All right, any comments? Discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, approved.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All righty. Any old business anyone would like to bring forth? Any? How about some new business? Anything we're unable to talk about, we need to talk about? And then opportunity for open discussion. Mr. Zahn, give your managing director's report.
I just want perhaps for this board to echo a comment, which is that I have been going around personally talking to employees out at Northside Generating Station, Brandy Branch, our water and wastewater facilities, and ensuring them that we understand that they are the number one asset of JEA that takes care of our customers, and that our commitment to them remains a number one commitment, because we understand that without them, and to ask for their leniency as we move through what I think is a very public and scenario-based strategic planning that's required, because of, I think, the community deserves to hear all of this out in the open, but it is difficult and for employees, and I just would like the board to continue to echo the commitment that I've been making to each of the employees, which is that we recognize that they're our number one asset.
That echoes my concerns on timing of implementation of status quo 2, because I'm not naive about this. I have no doubts that we've assembled a very talented employee base, including at the senior leadership team, and other utilities, IOUs. We'll look at this as an opportunity to try and poach talented employees at all levels, and I'm concerned about that.
For the chairman's report, I just kind of wanted to echo, what was said today. We're responding to a rapidly changing industry. For that matter, a technological world that's affecting us even beyond our utility and water needs. I was reading, and the phrase disruptive technology was coined in 1993. So as we said, this is not a new discussion. It's a discussion that has been had. I encourage this board and all of our stakeholders in the community, do your own research. You're going to be really surprised to hear how industries have been impacted by the change of innovation and technology. One of the first statements I read when I went on to McKinsey & Company's website was, many utilities see the digital revolution as a threat to their business model, but massive opportunities await those able to transform themselves ahead of the curve. And that's where JEA needs to be. This is a necessary process, a needed process. I thank you, Mr. Zahn, and your team for creating an open dialogue with the employees. That's rare when you're having to have these tough conversations. And I think by going the extra mile and handing out the challenge coins made them feel a part of the team, because we are all a part of this team. I'm confident that our leadership team, based on today's request, is committed to exploring the best solution that will take the customers, the employees, and the community and our environment into consideration. And if there are no other comments, meeting is adjourned.
Madam Chair, I'm sorry. We need to vote.
Did not vote on I think both, today's agenda as well as the consent agenda. I think we, I didn't give the opportunity to say aye.
We have a first and a second on
Yes.
the agenda. We need a vote. We have a first and a second on the adoption. We need
Okay.
minutes and we need a vote.
We have a first and a second on today's agenda. Just the all in favor, say
Aye.
all opposed. And we also have a first and a second for the consent agenda. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Both approved.
And we have a first and a second on
Oh, we gotta do that as well. We have a first and a second on the minutes, previous minutes. All in favor, say aye. All opposed? Approved.
Meeting's adjourned.
All right, second meeting, I'll get it right next time.
Thank you.